Hello, I'm Daniel Browning. Welcome to this program on nutrition in Indigenous communities. On behalf of everyone, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Wongal people. The Wongal people are the traditional owners of this land and form part of the wider Aboriginal nation, commonly known as Eora. We also acknowledge the elders and descendants of the Wongal people. Eating healthy food is vital to increasing the life expectancy of Indigenous Australians. Good nutrition in mothers and babies helps prevent infections and illness in children. It also helps prevent the development of chronic disease in later life. That may sound simple, but in fact it's a complex business, and that's what we're going to talk about in this program. We'll also look at some really good work that's being done in rural and remote Australia to improve our people's health and their nutrition. You'll find some useful links to the resources on the Rural Health Education Foundation's website, rhef.com.au. Now let's meet our panel in order. Andy Hume is a GP registrar and researcher at the Menzies School of Health Research in Darwin. His work as a doctor in the Northern Territory made him aware of the massive burden of malnutrition and associated lifestyle disease within communities, and the potential of community-grown fresh fruit and vegetables. Welcome, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Anthea Fawcett is the founder and director of the Remote Indigenous Gardens Network. She has 20 years of experience in sustainability, sustainable design, critical studies and intercultural communications, and she has a passion for local food production. Hello, Anthea.
Hello.
Ian Lacey is a Mandindangi and Waka Waka man from Queensland. He's the manager of the preventative health team at the Institute of Urban Indigenous Health in Brisbane. He had to live a healthy lifestyle during his professional football career with the Brisbane Broncos, and he continues to encourage us all to live a healthy lifestyle. Welcome, Ian.
Welcome.
Karen O'Dea is the director of the Sansom Institute for Health Research at the University of South Australia. Her current research is focused on diet and lifestyle in the prevention and treatment of diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. She has a particular interest in the health potential of traditional diets. Hello, Karen. And welcome to you all. Now, Karen, I guess to start, why is good nutrition so basic and so important to our health and well-being?
Because it's the foundation of a healthy life, and that's why we have to start thinking about it very early in life. And so I say to people, even pre-pregnancy and certainly in utero, terribly important that mothers are healthy and happy. Smoking is a real problem, and a lot of Aboriginal women smoke, and so it's really important that they try and give up during pregnancy, for example. And really a mother's perceived stress is also problematic. So again, we really want happy pregnancies. And then when the baby's born, breastfeeding is terribly important for many reasons. But good nutrition is certainly one of them. That is the best food for a baby. And then on it goes. You know, thinking about weaning foods, healthy weaning foods. And then preschool, and then school, when children go to school. All of those things are terribly important. But then we get to chronic disease. And if you have a very healthy start to life, you're less likely to be at risk of chronic disease as you grow older, and particularly if you get into good habits early in life. And as we'll discuss later, if you can afford healthy food, that is also a terribly important issue. But with chronic disease, we often hear the figure with diabetes, which is my particular interest, that it's 2 to 4 times higher in Aboriginal people than in non-Aboriginal people in Australia. Actually, it's much worse than that, because early onset diabetes means that people that in the 20 to 50 year age group, Aboriginal people have 10 times and sometimes more than 10 times higher rates of diabetes. That increases heart disease, it increases blindness, kidney failure, all of the things that go along with it. So early intervention and healthy nutrition is absolutely fundamental to dealing with any of these questions.
Ian, I might go through the panel and ask you all why nutrition is individually so important. Ian, why do you think we need to be really careful about our nutrition?
Yeah, I think as Karen said, we really need to watch what we eat, because of the fact that we don't understand what we're eating most of the time, and some people think they're eating good foods and they're displaying good habits, but they're actually not. And you know, as Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're very visual in our learnings. It's been passed down for generations. We see what someone does and we act upon it. We see what our family does and we act upon it. So if you display eating good foods at an early age, you're going to be able to help close the gap, as they say. People will follow you. If you show interest in doing good things and the fact that you are a good leader in communities, people will follow the fact that you do that. So if you eat good food at an early age, display it, be proud of it, people will follow what you do.
Anthea, some quick comments about why nutrition is so important.
Oh well, good nutrition, a good diet, the ability to eat well for good health. I mean, it is a key social determinant of health, and it just sets the platform for the rest of your life. And for many people in Indigenous communities, it has a huge impact on whether or not people have the ability to enjoy life, to participate in life, to actually be able to concentrate at school. It's about all those broader social benefits that impact on the opportunities you will have. Andy?
Yeah, I guess I come at it from a medical perspective of seeing a huge burden of cardiovascular disease in Aboriginal populations in the Northern Territory. And for me, the link between good nutrition, particularly fruit and vegetable intake, and ischemic heart disease has now been well proven. And it's a fundamental point to me that by improving nutrition and diets in Aboriginal people, and any people, we can reduce the levels of those disease burdens in populations. And for me, from a clinical perspective, seeing that day to day, it really brings it home to me that the benefits of lifestyle change and how effective that change can be on a larger scale at changing those disease burdens.
Karen, what's the picture across Australia, and does it differ between remote, rural and urban areas?
That's a really interesting question, and I think the only area where we've got good data is kidney failure, kidney disease, and that certainly indicates that there's much more kidney failure, people undergoing dialysis who identify as Indigenous in very remote parts of the country. And we don't understand the reasons for that. It could be, people think, high burden of infectious disease as well as all of the other risk factors. So, but with diabetes, what information we have, we don't have really good population-based data in non-remote areas. We do in some remote communities. Does indicate that there possibly is a gradient, but it is not as steep. So wherever Indigenous people are in the country, they have a lot of diabetes and heart disease.
Andy, are there any recent interesting research findings, perhaps the EPIC data?
Yeah, perhaps. Funny you should ask. I have it here in front of me. Yeah, Daniel, there is some very good new data that's come out of Europe. This is a study of 300,000 people, which is a huge and very powerful study that looked at the risk of dying from ischemic heart disease in association with multiple risk factors, including people's fruit and vegetable intake. And they found, after waiting about 8.5 years, that people who ate more fruit and vegetables were much less likely to die of a stroke or a heart attack, to the point where if you eat one more serve of fruit and vegetables, it reduces your absolute risk of death by 4% per year over that entire period. And they looked at the difference between people who ate 8 serves of fruit and vegetables, and these are only 80-gram serves, so they're pretty much in the same size as the Australian standard for what a fruit and vegetable serving is, all the way down to people who ate less than 3. And across that range, there was a 24% decrease in cardiovascular death risk, which is remarkable and very significant. And finally, it's not proof, but it's a very strong association between fruit and vegetable intake and risk of death. So that's quite exciting.
And as a GP, what are some of those clinical indicators of poor nutritional health? Poor nutrition.
I guess clinically it's often difficult to tell what people eat, and people often don't give you a very accurate assessment of what they eat. And Karen could probably speak more about dietary recall and how accurate that is in different populations. Yeah, so I see a broad range of people coming in with undernutrition and obesity often at the same time. So although people are big and they're getting enough energy, their calorific intake's more than adequate, they're not actually meeting their nutritional needs. Yeah.
That's very true.
Now, Karen, what do we know about traditional diet? We're going to talk about some of the historical and social context here.
Well, that it was a very healthy diet, that it actually was a very different diet to what people are eating today. It was a hunter-gatherer diet, so it's the diet to which humans were probably all adapted until agriculture for some parts of the world began 10,000 years ago. And the hunter-gatherer diet is a diet that actually has a lot of animal foods in it, wild animals. So they're very different to our domesticated animals. Much less fat on a carcass, a lot of lean. And people ate everything on that carcass. So they ate all the offal. And it's fascinating to know that in liver, and it isn't just kangaroo liver, it's any liver, vitamin C is stable, for example. It's a wonderful source of folate, of zinc and iron, bioavailable sources of those nutrients. And in fact, I think it's a very low-cost food that I would encourage Indigenous people to continue eating, and other offal as well. Brain, for example, is the richest source of long-chain omega-3 fats that you can get. And it's very important for brain development, very important for eye development, so very important for human development. And now people, all of us, are eating much less probably than what we need. And then the plant foods were much less than in our current diet, but the ones that people had were slowly digested carbohydrate in the yams, for example, and beautiful flavour. And in some of the other fruits and vegetables, probably not as sweet and as easy to eat as many of our own fruits today, but rich in nutrients and full of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents. So it's really the absolute opposite to the very poor quality diet that many Indigenous people, and particularly in remote communities today, are eating. And we'll talk about some of the pressures that are pushing people towards those different types of diets.
Ian, a question for you. What factors would influence a person's diet, do you think? I mean, they might be geographic, they might be economic. There are a lot of factors at play.
Yeah, I think definitely geographic, definitely economic. You know, you look at two opposite ends of the spectrum when you talk about remote and urban communities. You know, out remote communities, it's very hard to get good fruit and vegetables, good sources of meat, good sources of fish. But then the opposite end of the spectrum in urban, which is where I am at the moment, although we have got all this good stuff, we've got the other stuff as well. We've got the really bad stuff at our disposal. So we've got to combat that. So you talk about knowing what the good food is out there, but a lot of people know the bad food. A lot of people eat food not understanding what the food is. They think it may be good for you, but they're not have a full understanding, and they can't relate it to chronic disease. So if you can sort of educate them a little bit better, let them be aware of what they're actually eating, and then give them the choice to make the right choice. Most people will take that right choice most of the time.
I'm not sure about this, but do you think there's a typical diet for the urban Indigenous person?
Definitely not. There's not a typical diet for anyone.
Yeah.
You know, people go through their fads and they will hear something good and they'll think, oh yeah, that sounds good, I might try it. And as I said earlier, we're very visual people, so if we see our family eating bad, we'll try that. And that's not necessarily just Indigenous, that's society. People will try different things and try and get the best way to do something, and then if it doesn't work, they'll go try something else. So there's not really a typical diet.
Without being too obstructive, I agree, there's no typical diet, but there's certainly some patterns that are being seen in remote places in terms of diet that are quite concerning. And Karen sounds like she wants to talk about that.
Well, very, very poor quality diet. For example, in some recent surveys, some colleagues have found that white bread is the major source of protein in some communities. Well, that's extraordinary, because there's so little protein in white bread. So they must be eating a huge amount. And we know that Indigenous people love meat. Traditionally, they ate a lot of meat, but very difficult to afford high quality lean meat and fish today. So, and we do know, sadly, that there's very low intakes of fresh fruit and vegetables. And unfortunately, very high intakes of sugar-sweetened beverages. So those are some qualities that we can discuss some of the reasons for that, but sadly there are patterns, I think, that are really, really disturbing.
Do you think bush tucker is a relevant concept for most Aboriginal people in your experience?
I'll be interested in other people's views on this. I actually find it a wonderful way to talk to people about good nutrition, to actually have that as the benchmark. And to be able to explain the problems, the positives and the negatives of the Western diet in the context of the traditional hunter-gatherer diet. Because I say that's become my benchmark. That's become my benchmark for judging any diet now, in many ways.
Anthea, what do you think about that? Bush tucker, is it relevant from the communities that you've had to deal with or you've dealt with over the years?
Yeah, no, it's very relevant, and I think the way Karen's described the importance of bush tucker on two levels. I mean, if you can access it, then it probably is the ideal diet in many, not just for Indigenous people, for all of us. But it's also a great way of having the conversation about food in a culturally relevant way, and that is so important. You know, that people feel comfortable with the ideas and can relate to the ideas in their local context. Through the work of the Remote Indigenous Gardens Network, we often talk about, and we're about local food production, not just gardens, we often talk about fusion gardens or fusion approaches to food, and by that we mean, you know, celebrating and making the most of bush foods, plant and animal based, alongside, in conjunction with exotics, fruit and vegetables that are introduced. And many bush foods, you know, the traditional lean meat bush foods are just so profoundly important, but in many communities where the communities have grown in number and have become settled in a single place, the access to bush foods is just not as great as it once was, which is a really big issue. And then there are bush foods that are available which have fantastic nutritional properties, things like gubbinge with vitamin C.
We're going to move on now to our case study. 21-year-old Yvonne is 3 months pregnant with her first child. She is generally healthy and a little overweight. She reports smoking about 10 cigarettes a day. She drank alcohol occasionally but stopped when she discovered she was pregnant. Yvonne lives on a remote community in New South Wales where there is very little access to fresh fruit and vegetables. She sometimes eats fresh fish when the river is running, but for most of her meals she is dependent on the community store. Yvonne comes into the community clinic for a checkup. Andy, what do you think are Yvonne's nutritional requirements at this stage of her life?
So what is she? She's about into the first trimester, I think.
First trimester.
Yeah, so she's got a higher folate requirement than the average person, so anywhere between 0.5 and 5 milligrams a day, depending on her risk for neural tube defects. She's got a higher iron requirement through pregnancy and through lactation if she chooses to breastfeed, which we would support. Her protein requirement and her energy requirement do increase, and towards the end of pregnancy in the second and third trimester they go up a fair bit, but not to the point where she needs to eat for two. That's a common fallacy. I would, and in terms of so that's a sort of her need in an academic sense. In terms of my advice to her, I'd say stick to a balanced diet, fruit and vegetables, the old 2 and 5 adage, keeping up her calcium intake with dairy. And I'd also probably take the time to talk about smoking and the massive impact that can have on her child. Alcohol, which I think she's not drinking.
She's not drinking anymore.
Yep. So I'd encourage that, and so that's great. And I guess I'd use the time to go through some of the risks that she faces through her pregnancy of having too much weight and being overweight. She's got a BMI of 27, which in many populations doesn't put her at increased risk, but as an Aboriginal person and some other groups, particularly Indians and I'm sure there's other populations, she's at greater risk of developing complications through her pregnancy.
Why is that? I mean, I'm fascinated to know that the BMI index is used to determine whether we're overweight, but our morphology, well, Aboriginal morphology, some Aboriginal morphology is different to Torres Strait Islander. Why are we at greater risk?
That's a good question. I think if you could answer that, you'd be a millionaire. Karen, do you have any insight into that?
Well, I think part of the answer is where some population groups deposit their fat, and what we've observed, and I think it was very interesting to bring in the analogy with Indian populations as well. Same thing happens. They talk about the Tamil tummy, and the fact that people will deposit fat on their stomachs, and when it's in the abdomen, you don't have to gain very much fat at all. And you still don't look fat, and yet it can be dangerous for you, and that's what causes, you know, the metabolic derangements that eventually lead to diabetes. So we would really caution an Aboriginal woman with a BMI of 27, which, you know, some people might argue that's almost obese when you've got a fine frame. And what you're talking about, the morphology. What we're really talking about is a body build which is narrow across the shoulders and hips, and relatively shorter torso and long limbs. It's very good for a hot climate, but it is not meant to get fat, basically, because what happens is the fat seems to really deposit around the stomach.
What are the other things she's at risk of as her pregnancy develops?
Lots of things. So if she's got a bit of extra weight on, she's at greater risk of developing gestational diabetes, and that carries lots of inherent risk. Being heavier or gaining more weight through pregnancy means her child's more likely to be a bigger baby. She's also at more risk of getting hypertension or preeclampsia, and then the risk of eclampsia from that. If she goes through with a labour, she's at more risk of having an obstructed labour because she's having a larger baby, potentially. And that carries all kinds of risks. Then you've got a risk of caesarean and a complicated caesarean. Once the baby's born, she's at greater risk of having a thromboembolic event afterwards. She's also, as a larger person, at more risk of developing postnatal depression, and she's at more risk of having trouble breastfeeding. That's mum, that's Yvonne. In terms of the child's risk, that's also significant as well. If you're looking at nutrient status in that developing fetus, a child that's growing up in an environment with questionable nutritional status inside mum is much more likely to develop high blood pressure, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, the metabolic syndrome in later life.
And what's the role of the local primary healthcare practitioner in improving people's nutritional intake, someone like Yvonne at this stage of her life?
I guess it's a good opportunity to identify these issues early and get Yvonne involved in nutritional intervention programs quickly. And I don't know if this is relevant, but general practitioners provide a lot of nutritional advice, and I think their role as a care provider, often a central care provider, shouldn't be undervalued, but they need to work in conjunction with community programs and with allied health professionals in changing the way things work.
We'll return to Yvonne. She's now given birth to her baby, Lucy. The baby is 5 months old and is still being breastfed. The community nurse visits Yvonne and with an Aboriginal health worker to discuss the nutritional needs of the baby and of Yvonne. Yvonne is thinking of giving up breastfeeding and wants to talk about introducing solids. Andy, how would you discuss with Yvonne the nutritional needs of that little baby of hers, Lucy?
Yeah, it's challenging, and I guess my main point here would be that I'd like her to keep on breastfeeding. Breast milk is designed perfectly for human development. It's been around for a long time, a lot longer than bottled milk, and it provides all the nutritional needs for a child. It also confers immunity to a baby, which has long-term developmental effects. It's not just about nutrition. So that'd be the focus of my attention, I think.
I'd certainly support that, to keep breastfeeding for at least 6 months, but you know, in toto, but for longer if she can, and but then to think about the introduction of healthy foods, not necessarily baby foods, and there, you know, to mash up vegetables and mash up fruit, and then give babies that it's very good to give them chunks of food as soon as they get their teeth, as they're starting to get their teeth, and they can start to get the texture of food. Not to treat them, you know, as a sort of different species, which I think we tend to do, but to actually give them food.
Yes. And what do you think the components of an educational program would be for people like Yvonne, young mothers with young Aboriginal women with babies?
Well, I would again draw on the traditional models that I've learnt about from Aboriginal women, older Aboriginal women, and the fact that children didn't eat anything different to adults, but would be pre-chewed and given to them and that sort of thing, and they would just be. And they would quite quickly learn to get food themselves, and I guess you know, so it really would be. Obviously, it's different. People are not living traditional lifestyles now, but it is a good model.
There are a lot of resources out there, Ian, for you know, to help us with make the right decisions when it comes to our nutrition. Can you talk a little bit about some of the resources that have been developed where you are in Queensland?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot out there, and I think it's just important for people to realise how much is out there and have access to it. There are a few that we use. There's the simple pie chart that we use. We use that in our educational program and just make them understand of the different food groups and how to adapt that into meals. That's a big issue out there at the moment. As you said, everyone knows there's a lot of fatty foods and a lot of sugary foods out there at the moment, but people just think that's part of the norm. It's about letting them know that this isn't part of the norm. This is away from the circle. You know, this is where the circle is. This is what you need to be eating. You should be eating this much of that, and really making them aware of the ramifications if they don't eat this food and they eat the sugary foods. That's a really good resource, as I said. The Living Strong program in Queensland is a pretty good resource also. That program, it shows you all about what you need to do to burn off the food that you do eat, the bad foods that you eat, the good foods that you eat. And it really does paint a picture to show you that, you know, if you do go out and have a chocolate bar or a beer or a burger or something, it shows you that you really do have to work a long time to get that off. And it seems silly sometimes when you say, you know, you just ate a battered fish and chips, you got to go work it for 4.5 hours. They look at you and think, you know, it's pretty silly, but it's actually true. And you combine that with a can of Coke and then a chocolate bar, and it becomes really relevant that these people have to really do something about the food they're eating. Otherwise, they are going to get the diabetes, they are going to become overweight, they are going to get the chronic diseases. So that resource is also pretty good. Good Quick Tuck is another one that the Queensland Aboriginal Health Council is rolling out at the moment. It's based on the Jamie Oliver's Ministry of Food, where you get taught how to cook a meal within 30 minutes, cheap, accessible. You learn how to do it, then you go teach someone. Then they go teach someone, so it's a pyramid effect. And the theory of it is if then you go teach a mother how to do it, she goes teaches her family. You know, they go teach their cousins, they go teach their, you know, it goes on like that, and then hopefully we can get healthier that way.
Anthea, you must have seen some good resources over the years, dietary resources.
Yeah, well, there's lots of interesting programs, and I suppose a lot of, you know, people are exploring and experimenting with public health promotion programs, and there's a need for evaluation to find out the ones which really, really do hit the mark. But there's one program I came across recently is Crunch and Sip from New South Wales, Healthy Kids Association. Really clever program where you actually stop class in mid-morning, and it's a dedicated stop to get kids to eat fruit and to drink water. And I think in this whole conversation, drink water, drink water, drink water is so important. The Jimmy Little Foundation Thumbs Up program is sort of an integrated health promotion, nutrition promotion program around healthy living messages, again fruit and veg and water, that links across health services, schools and food stores in remote communities. Indigenous Health Infonet has a dedicated nutrition section, which is really, really important. Northern Territory Department of Education have launched the Thumbs Up Nutrition Education website for teachers. So there's lots out there.
And the Fred Hollows Foundation has this book, which is a terrific book because it actually is around cooking for a large family up to a very large group, and it's all healthy cooking with excellent recipes and excellent instruction.
What, from 6 people to 50?
Yeah. So it is important that there are these people know about the good resources that are available.
They're certainly available. And
breastfeeding, of course, that is by far, as Andrew said, that is the best, healthiest start that an infant can have. And if you can possibly breastfeed, and that's one of the really good messages in many remote communities, that women still do predominantly breastfeed, that is a very, very positive trend. So all we have to do is encourage them to keep going. And then, of course, after that, as we talked about, there are then healthy foods as they are weaned and the transition to a normal diet, a healthy diet.
And that weaning transition is often where you see failure to thrive in infants, and I think that's the problem. A lot of the problem is at that time, and it's indicative of difficult access to food and difficult difficulty in getting people educated about transition foods to get kids going.
And why breastfeeding for as long as you can, you know, significantly is so important, because it always is a backstop, even if it's not it won't be the entire diet after 6 months.
We've discussed the importance of supporting new mothers and babies. It's also important to keep up good nutrition in growing children. As we've heard, children's physical and cognitive development relies on healthy food. Let's go to northern New South Wales to see what the Bulganaru Aboriginal Medical Service in Grafton has been doing to help families improve their nutrition.
The fruit and vegetable program was established initially as a sort of school-based program out at Bayugal, which is sort of a small Aboriginal community school about 80 kilometres away from Grafton.
When we looked at the diet of the children who were attending the school, there was about 20 children there, all Aboriginal children, their diet was fairly poor. So we decided to do some studies, and we found that every child was deficient in vitamin C, and about 75% were deficient in iron as well.
Some banana.
Initially it was sort of school, there was fruit at the school, and then there was sort of meals that were offered at the school, and a garden that was developed. So it was a whole sort of nutritional package at the school, and it seemed to make a big difference to the kids' health in over a 6 to 12 month period. As a result of the success of that, it was expanded to the other communities that we serve, the towns in the Clarence Valley, Grafton, Maclean, Yamba. It was much more difficult to target the children because they're only a small percentage of the children at each of the schools in those towns. And so then it sort of changed to become a family-based fruit and vegetable subsidy program.
G'day, Deb.
Hello.
How you going today?
Good, thanks.
Got your box ready out the back?
Beautiful.
Another nice day coming in?
So we identify people who seem to have the most need from a health perspective, but also from a nutritional and a financial perspective, are most likely to benefit from a program such as this.
How you going, Debbie? You here to fix up your AMS?
Yes, thanks.
As part of the program, they come and they have a health assessment, and while they're having health assessments, they'll also have hearing checks if they're indicated they haven't been done.
Hello.
Hello, Tiffany.
And also we have a dentist here, so we're able to sort of offer dental checkups as well. So they have dental checkups. We have dietitians who work here, and so we can refer them to the dietitians. I also am doing a PhD looking specifically at the fruit and vegetable program and an evaluation of that.
We try to do some kind of short program in each community in the Clarence Valley at some time through the year. So this group in Maclean, we have a lot of the elders come, and some of the younger people drop in as well. We'd like to get more of the younger people coming in, especially the mums with young children. We provide lots of healthy ingredients, so there's usually lots of vegetables and fruit, and we try and promote some of the healthier cooking methods, or we might try to change some old favourites.
So I just love it.
And it's good time to myself, because when you've got 3 kids, you don't have time to yourself. And sometimes when they want to help, it's good for them. And it gets them interested in healthy eating too, especially when the veggies.
I know my daughters, they're cooking with this now, the bok choy and things like that, and they're experimenting. So I think the more that we can get into like schools and teach our children, because then this becomes a part of their life.
Okay, what have we got today?
Today we're going out to Bayugal School and we're going to be cooking with the children out there. Since we started the nutrition program, we've noticed dramatic improvements in their health. So we want to maintain those improvements, and each week Carol, one of the teachers, cooks a healthy lunch on a Tuesday.
They will try different things if we encourage them, and the staff at the school are very good at encouraging them. When I ask them in previous sessions if they cook at home, they all say that they do help out at home.
Una, could you please wash this lettuce for me?
I've been a doctor for 30 years. It's the most dramatic thing that I've seen in my medical career in terms of a simple intervention providing such a great health outcome.
Doc couldn't believe it because no more scripts had to be written out. This program could go into any other schools that have got Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal kids that have got problems with their skin, sores, ears, the runny noses.
The kids are interested in getting in and planting some veggies. If we can grow our own here and use that, it's also a good skill that the kids can learn.
In terms of the outcomes, there are a number of things that we found. We did blood testing and sort of diet histories which showed that the children's nutrition seemed to improve while they were on the program. In the sort of short term, there were 30 to 50% decreases in the rates of attendances to the hospital emergency department, in terms of skin infections and in terms of the numbers of antibiotics that were prescribed. We think these are not just statistically significant but also clinically relevant improvements in the children's health.
Can I have an apple?
Yeah, can you get me one too, please?
Our thanks to the Bulganaru Aboriginal Medical Service and the communities of Grafton, Maclean and Bayugal for allowing us to film their programs. And Andy, I wonder if you had any broad response to the program being tried up there in Grafton.
Yeah, I guess it's doing some amazing things, and I think some of the fundamentals around what I've been looking at in the top end of the Northern Territory. I've been looking at remote food gardens north of Tennant Creek and evaluating what makes them tick and what people think makes them work or not work. What these guys are doing is culturally appropriate. It seems to involve the community. It's empowering the community to change in the long term. And I think those fundamentals are really important in setting up these programs. If I may, I might talk briefly about some of the other things that make these programs work. I think longer funding and training periods work well. Often, especially in remote places, people see programs come and go. They often are set up to fail because there's not enough time. I see people talking about managerial processes and people coming into communities and not engaging the community properly. So I think that's fundamental as well. And we'll speak about this later on, but people working in food gardens want real jobs and they want to be paid for it equitably. I think we'll talk about that a bit more later on though.
We certainly will. We're going to move through to the barriers to adopting healthy food choices. And Anthea, do you think improving our nutritional knowledge is really is enough to improve nutrition on its own?
I think knowing about good nutrition is really important for anyone, and reiterating what Andy's just said, however you impart knowledge has to be done in a culturally appropriate, engaging way. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do tend to be visual learners. oral educators and learners, very responsive to role models and to you know, peer relations and example. Yeah, I mean, nutritional education needs to be delivered in appropriate ways and in more engaging, relevant ways that people can relate to, and in language and in English. But, you know, nutrition education is not the whole story. There's been an enormous amount done as well, and I think sometimes to focus on, you know, getting more literature out there is kind of to miss the game a bit, really. A lot of people do know what to eat. They just can't afford it and they just can't access it.
Karen, what are some of the other barriers? And you know, Anthony's just touched on them.
I think one of the final points that Anthea made there about the cost of healthy food. I think there's a slide that's going to be up in a moment on that, the economics of food choice. And what you'll see here is over on the left, oil, margarine, flour and sugar are the cheapest foods in calories per dollar. There's absolutely no question about that. And down, and I'm sorry that you probably can't read it very well, but down on the right are all the foods that we want people to eat. Fresh fruit and vegetables, but also lean meat and fish, dairy foods, that type of thing. And they're much more expensive just in terms of literally saying, how much food can I get for my dollar? So people, when they're hungry, anywhere in the world will actually choose to maximise what they can buy. And people in the remote parts of Northern Territory actually call flour, sugar and white bread hungry foods. So, you know, that's the way they describe it. That is their emergency foods, and yet they tend to have to eat them a lot of the time.
Are there other significant cultural factors that need to be addressed, do you think, in terms of changing those nutritional patterns?
One of the other very interesting ones is the culture of sharing, and it's a very nice culture, I really like it. But it means that if you buy food and you cook it, then your relatives can come in and they can have some too. So we found that one of the reasons in one remote community that people were really often going to the takeaway was because that tradition didn't extend to the takeaway. And if you bought a takeaway meal, you could eat it yourself. So immediately we are starting to say, well, maybe that's what we've got to focus on. We've got to get healthy takeaways and reasonable prices as well.
Moving on, Ian, can you tell us about the Deadly Choices program? Great name. What's it all about?
It's very deadly. Deadly Choices is the brand that we've flooded through Southeast Queensland at the moment. Out of Deadly Choices comes the programs, comes the education, comes the community sports days, community events. So the Deadly Choices program is something that we're rolling out in communities and schools. It's all about empowering our community members to make the right choice. As a lot of people are aware that a lot of people know it's not good to smoke, a lot of people know it's not good to eat bad food, but they don't understand why. So we feel if we can actually give them a little bit of education that can help them along their way, they'll make the good choice, they'll make the deadly choice, and then it will flow throughout the community. You know, leadership is the first one we talk about, and it's very important to touch on this subject because, you know, there's good leaders and there's bad leaders out there, but the thing we want to do is empower people to identify the fact that, yeah, I am a good leader and yeah, I can show that in my community. And you don't have to be an elder in the community, you don't have to be male, female, just a little kid going to school, someone eating breakfast. That's showing good leadership in the community, but the more people we have showing these traits, the better our communities are going to be. So we don't want to overwhelm them with education, it's just all about giving them the right education so then they can go out and use it in their community. So we talk about leadership, we talk about chronic disease, smoking, nutrition, physical activity, substance abuse. We have to look at it as a holistic approach because you can't treat one of these things without the others. We talk about smoking and, you know, it's very bad in our communities at the moment and it is a big issue, but poor nutrition comes along with smoking. Poor nutrition comes along with drinking. People don't realise that when you go out for a night on the town, get on the drink, you're doing more damage to yourself by stopping having McDonald's at 4 o'clock in the morning than by having it sort of during the day when you will actually go and burn it off. So it's empowering people with a little bit of knowledge so they can then go out in communities, try it, and get other people to follow them.
What do you think some of the key features of successful healthy lifestyle programs might be?
I think the programs have to be owned by the community. That's very important. If the community don't own the program, they're not going to want to implement it. So you get the right people in the communities to drive it, Use your Aboriginal medical services, use your local community organisations, get them to drive the programs. You're just a system. You're not there to run the program for them. You're there to show them this is what we can do for you. You drive it, we'll help you, and then you'll get better results that way. Once people own a program, they get passionate about it, you know they'll take it on board, and you know you get the results that way. If you go tell someone, I'm going to make you eat well now, you're going to come do this cooking program with me, you'll get no one show up. But if you educate them a bit more, saying this is what you're going to benefit out of a good cooking program, you're going to be the ones doing the cooking, we're just going to show you just a little bit, you'll get more people show up and you'll get better results that way.
And I mean, it's important that kids have good role models. I mean, what did your career teach you about nutrition? Did you learn about nutrition as a rugby league player?
Yeah, I was very lucky. Sport's been my life for a long time. I grew up playing sport through school. I was playing that many different sports. It wasn't funny, but I moved into a professional organisation at the Broncos, and we were taught how to eat well. We were taught how to maintain good health, how to, you know, the right kind of nutrition against the right amount of physical activity. You know, it's all about getting the balance. And as I said, I was very privileged to have that information instilled upon me. But the thing about when you take these out to communities is a lot of people don't know that sort of stuff, and they haven't been given that education at a younger age. So for us to go out and try and talk to them on a higher level where they're not going to really understand it, you're not going to get much out of it. So it's all about knowing who your community, who your audience is, knowing what information you can and can't give to them, and displaying it the right way.
We're going to move on now to a discussion about food security and community gardens. And Karen, can I begin with you? The World Health Organization has defined food security. It's a very broad principle. Can you tell us what it is?
They basically have said that all people at all times should have access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food. It's up on the slide now, to maintain a healthy and active life. Now that's a wonderful principle, and we as a country subscribe to it. So it's very important that we don't leave great sections of our populations behind. And it isn't just Indigenous people in remote parts of the country, although they are a particularly at-risk and vulnerable group, but it's also disadvantaged people wherever they are in society.
It is relevant to Indigenous people, though.
Very.
Yeah. Anthea, you would also consider it to be, you know, highly relevant to Indigenous people.
Food security.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, another definition, they all say much the same thing, is, you know, just the ability to access, afford and to utilise, and that sort of breaks down into all the sorts of things we're talking about tonight. You know, you need to know what to eat, you need to be able to access it physically and economically, you need to be able to afford it, and you need to be able to actually able to cook, use, consume it. And the point about the sharing culture and so on was a really interesting point Karen just raised. But no, it's hugely important to people in remote communities, and we have to assume fuel prices aren't going down in the future. You know, we have got climate change adaptation and you know, really significant changes happening across Northern Australia. So I don't think it's too hokey to say that all of us, wherever we live, should be looking at how growing our own food in different ways, from small-scale self-provisioning through to commercial initiatives over time, can all contribute to our food systems and our food security, and include principles about food sovereignty, which respect Indigenous people's traditional food systems.
And what public health measures do you think are needed to improve access to healthy food? I mean, the issues are complicated, but just very quickly.
Public health measures?
Public health measures, yeah.
Well, I think the infrastructures, both physical and also of human personnel, need to be invested in, and that's happening very extensively through the healthy and active lifestyle workforces and so forth, which is fantastic. And in other areas it's happening through CDP programs, but I'm referring specifically to remote communities here, and picking up on Andy's point, there's a need to invest in people's skills to support communities to grow their own food as they want to. For the long term.
I think there's also a number of moves to get stores more efficient and accountable, and serving communities' needs much more directly than they necessarily have been in the past, through outback stores and ALPA as well, organisations like that, working for the communities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Food stores reform is an absolutely central plank, along with other local initiatives.
Well, let's look at an example of a horticulture course in Broome that's attracting Indigenous students who are interested in developing food gardens in their own communities. This course is being run in cooperation with traditional elders by the Broome campus of the Kimberley Training Institute.
Well, I think it's been recognised for quite a few years now that we've got diet-related health problems in remote communities. We've got all sorts of social problems out there with people needing to do things. And we could see as horticulturists, I guess, as gardeners, that setting up food gardens was an answer. So we run a horticultural training program, which includes certificates 1 through to 4. A very practical training program, which is all about encouraging the growth and the development of community food gardens and fresh food gardens, particularly geared towards remote Aboriginal communities.
The gubbin tree, it's flowering now, new season, new flowering.
When we started doing it, there was this feeling that no, you can't grow food in remote communities, it's too hard. We tried to do it before, the plants weren't watered and they died. But that to me was a challenge because we've got wonderful technology of irrigation, automatic watering systems. So through training, we were able to install those sort of watering systems, demonstrate that yes, you can grow things, and that was one of the more satisfying parts of it all.
Yeah, so just patience, take your time, it's no rush.
We've got a number of students that have maintained a long-term association with us. Meridu Walbity is one who's there now from Bidjadanga. He's one of the last of the traditional people to come out of the Great Sandy Desert, and he's really embraced this, which has been very, very encouraging for us to have traditional people really embrace it and support what we're doing.
Thousands of years people were living on the food they till today. And that tree over there is always a healthy tree. And always healthy tree. You live off the land, you live off here. Hey, food. They're always healthy, and you don't get diabetes or whatever, kidney or heart. That's what our main aim is. Just showing our young ones. We don't want to see our young generation or anyone stuck up in that. Get up, end up with that.
Have a look, Mary. Is that your little sugar bag bees or what? Yeah, sugar bag.
This is basically a taster. It's not a big area at all. It's only less than an acre. But it's a model of what people can do. So we've got a range of local bush plants. We've got mangoes. We've got all sorts of fruit and veggies that we rotate through the year. A lot of the green leafy stuff during the dry season. Peas, beans, corn, sweet potatoes.
You might come here, pick up food. What food you look at? Always fresh. Not what they grow here doesn't sit on but a month, and people can just come and get food and take them home, and they're healthy.
We'll show you how to grow your conventional fruit and veggies, but we also started working with the traditional people who were telling us about their traditional plants. So growing the gubbins has been a really remarkable story because we started growing a few here and there, and then in the meantime, this great interest came through with gubbins. Research by the CSIRO confirmed its wonderful nutritional value, its wonderful antioxidant levels. So we had this thing, suddenly we found ourselves in the right place at the right time, having pioneered the cultivation of this bush fruit, and suddenly it was something that everyone wanted more of. So this is another great success for us in that we're doing a culturally appropriate plant, working together with Indigenous people in an area that's really presenting some great commercial potential.
Something to put them in the ground and the land, and I like the other mob get what I achieve myself, and I'm proud of it. Working through horticulture and TAFE, it's plenty to do.
This is an answer, and to really make it go and to really make it work, we've got to create jobs in communities. We've got to create businesses. I mean, remote communities spend a fortune on bringing in fruit and veggies that's poor quality, very expensive. So we need that. We need people to sort of see that and to really recognise this as a way of doing something useful and positive. Now, you can't expect people who are just working for the dole to keep going year after year, which is what's been happening, not getting any real jobs out of it. So we need to create positions where people who we train can go back to a community and get a paid job, and then we can keep supporting them. That's the missing link at the moment. But we really embrace that whole idea, and there's no reason why communities right across Australia can't have this and it can't become part of the culture in years to come. I think it will, but we've got to push it. It won't happen by itself.
You know, just step by step, you get there. Aye.
Our thanks to Kim Courtney, Meridu Walbity and students and staff in Broome. Andy, do you reckon the one being tried in Broome is a very quickly, is it a good model?
So I think there's many things that go into good solid garden models, and what they're doing there is sustainable, and changing the way people think about food and giving them the power to go out and change their food environment. And
is there a role, do you reckon, for horticulturists, in particular Indigenous horticulturists in remote communities?
Definitely, and there are many,
kind of work,
many Indigenous horticulturalists in remote communities. And across the top of the country in tropical environments, who knows how many remote food gardens there are? Lots. I know of at least 35 in the top end of the territory.
Let's move on now to the question and answer segment. Your questions have been coming in whilst the panel were talking. We're also going to ask some questions of you, the audience. You can answer these questions by clicking on the circle next to each of your answers. Don't type the answer into the live talk text box. We'll kick off with a general question for the audience. And that is, where are you located? Are you remote, regional, rural or metropolitan? To the panel, I mean, we've touched on some really important issues, but I guess there were some things that we didn't pick up on, and I think subsidisation of food was a really key issue, and I don't think we dealt with that in enough depth.
No. I think it's a very important issue, and I think we have to think. Some people have talked about prescriptions through primary care, prescriptions of healthy food, and I really like that idea, except I'm very nervous of over-medicalising the food, healthy food, and people thinking that somebody else has to take responsibility for those choices. So while I could imagine it very importantly for a malnourished child, somebody in an acute situation where it was highly justified, I'd prefer subsidies of some sort. And the other side of it is that we could put taxes on unhealthy foods, and this is very seriously being considered in other countries, and in fact Denmark has introduced taxes on sugar, the high sugar and high fat foods. The United States is considering it in a number of places, particularly on sugar sweetened drinks. So, and the most important thing is if we do introduce these taxes, in a way, beneficial ones, subsidies and actual taxes, we have to find out whether they are effective. So we must evaluate. And that's one of the things we haven't been very good at doing with many of the programs, exciting as they are in the past.
Now, Roy Price from Ethical Nutrition Services in Alice Springs says research in the Northern Territory suggests that in general, community-based Aboriginal people have a very good understanding of healthy eating and the components of a healthy diet, but it's poverty that's been identified as the key driver of food choice and eating behaviour. Roy asks the panel, isn't it time that healthy foods are not only prescribed, as you were talking about, but subsidised and prescribed just as the drugs are, which are used to manage the symptoms of these diseases? How would a healthy prescription work? I mean, would you go to the doctor and say, I need, what's your prescription for me?
Well, maybe he's saying it's a mixture of the two.
Right.
And I guess, I think certainly what we spend on drugs is phenomenal. And it would be very interesting to do the sums on that, is if we could prescribe healthy food or have systems that supported the acquisition of healthy food for people who wanted to. I've actually thought of a frequent flyer card where people could be rewarded for healthy choices of food and have more money put on their card so that they would then have that to spend. So that's, I think there are many ways it could be done.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, as you say, the medicalisation of it probably outlines the issue that diet does impact on health, but medicalising it's not going to solve the broader problem. And broadly, you need to change diet in large numbers of people, not just those people who attend a GP or attend a doctor.
You know, a subsidy can be, you know, done at many levels, I suppose, at the individual level, at the store, and perhaps that's what we're talking about here, the idea of subsidising the ability to purchase food. Another type of subsidy which I think is very relevant when we're talking about remote communities is that effectively many public services and public goods are already subsidised through infinite numbers of government programs. I say bring on the subsidy for the jobs, for the people to work in the gardens, and that will flow through into the emerging micro enterprises and existing food stores.
Now we've got a question from Dr. Ray Jones and Fiona Smith from Bulganaru AMS, and they ask, has a fruit and vegetable subsidy program similar to the one in Grafton been trialled elsewhere in Australia? And is there any other evidence from studies in Australia and internationally to show that subsidising fruit and vegetables has health benefits? Karen.
Well, in answer to the first one, I'm not aware, but I'm sure there are other programs where there have been subsidies, but I don't think they've been evaluated and written up. And I think that's one of the things that we do need to do, and that's one of the really wonderful things about the program we saw, that Andrew Black is doing that as his PhD. So I do think it's going to be a landmark study, and they are to be commended on it.
And your responses to our first poll question are in. Our question was, where are you located? 25% of you live in remote areas, 20% in rural areas, 20% also in regional areas, and 35% in metropolitan areas. Now, another question for you all out there. What do you think are the three main factors contributing to poor nutrition in Indigenous communities? And you can tick up to 3 answers. Is it limited access to fresh fruit and vegetables in local shops? Lack of knowledge and understanding? Is it food preferences? Low income? Overcrowded housing? Limited use of traditional foods? Or eating too much takeaway? Now, Jill from Canberra asks, actually, this is interesting, the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forests is developing Australia's first ever national food plan. And what do you think is important to include in this food plan, Anthea?
I refer you to the RIG Network submission to the National Food Plan. Look, I think it's really exciting. Australia's developing a national food plan. It's kicking off all sorts of strategic conversations that need to happen across the spectrum of issues relevant to food and the food system. From a remote perspective, which is where I've been focusing in consultations with people, there's a whole range of measures that I think we need, but perhaps foremost to hand, perhaps 2 I would focus on. One is that when we think of what a national food plan should incorporate, it shouldn't just be cast in a business as usual imaginary of how the food system works, and that it explicitly needs to incorporate the values and practices of food sovereignty, which really do value and recognise local food systems and that they work differently in different places and in turn require support. Further to which my second point would be for remote Indigenous communities to be producing more food in and by them, we need to invest in the long-term capacity building and training and support for Indigenous horticulturalists to own, run and deliver what they and their communities want to own, run and deliver for the long term.
And that food sovereignty, just explain that for us. That's where they are, I guess, self-sustaining and they develop their own, they grow their own food?
Food sovereignty is, it's more, it comes out of an Indigenous movement in South America. Yeah, and it's the idea that everyone, however powerful you are or are not, has a stake in this fundamental human right and a stake in their local food system. So it's about valuing food producers, valuing food, valuing the health of the environment, valuing the rights of others, recognising complexity and hybrid systems, that we're not all in one modernist view of the world. Yeah.
To make a comment on that, I really think we have to focus on health and the benefit of the whole community. And I think at some of the discussions I've been listening to on it, although I haven't read it in depth, really not focusing on that. It's around the economics and that type of thing, which is obviously important. But we don't just want a food system driven by profit. We want a food system that looks much more holistically at our future.
Barbara Humphrey asks, why are Indigenous people more susceptible to diabetes? Is there a genetic disposition?
Quite a lot of people would think there was a genetic predisposition, but I think before we go to that, we have to think about all of the environmental factors that are playing into the whole situation. We know that low birth weight increases your risk. But we know that poor nutrition in early life increases your risk. So there are a whole lot of things that maybe are genetic in the epigenetic sense of things, how your environment increases your genetic risk. But I would want to look at those things where we can intervene first before just falling back on saying, well, there's not much we can do because it's they're high risk genetically.
I would agree with that, and I think, I mean, it's an interesting academic question, but fundamentally it shouldn't change our practice. And there's so many modifiable risk factors causing these diseases that to attribute it, as you say, to genetics is, I don't know, it's like giving up. And
simplistic.
Yeah, it's a bit simplistic, yeah.
We do have some answers to the second poll question. Wow, they're coming in thick and fast. The question was, what do you think are the 3 main factors contributing to poor nutrition in Indigenous communities? 26% of you said it was limited access to fresh fruit and vegetables in local shops. 15% said lack of knowledge and understanding. 15% said food preferences. 31% said low income. 8% overcrowded housing. 14% limited use of traditional foods. And 9% eating too much takeaway. Anthea, any responses to those the results of that poll question?
Oh, I like them. No, and I mean, it's kind of confirmed some of the things that that through the various research and formal and informal that we do would suggest, and certainly that work like that Dr. Julie Brimblecombe and others are saying. I mean, and what I like about that response was that actually eating too much takeaway was the lowest rating one, lowest rated one. And so often you'll hear people saying, oh yes, but people, you can't get them off that takeaway, and it's very patronising and it's just wrong.
I'd like to add something to that one. I didn't like the fact that low income was the highest one there. I think that comes back to education and understanding. While yes, low income is a problem in our communities, that's not the be-all end-all why people are eating bad. It's because the easier food choices out there for them to go and get, so they go and get that one. I know, as I said, there is a difference between rural, remote and urban, but so many people will just take the easy choice most of the time. Low income does not mean you can't put a healthy meal on the table for your family. And it's a very big sort of pet hate of mine that people say, I haven't got enough money to buy the good stuff. As I said, I live in an urban area, so that's what I'm talking about. I can't speak for remote, but people in our areas, they can eat right, they just don't understand how to.
I must say that I think in remote areas it is very difficult to afford a healthy diet. I mean, we've done the sums on this, and people are already spending up to 50% of their income on food, and they're still, they'd have to spend. We've worked out probably another 20% in order to, and that would be a very challenging healthy diet. It wouldn't be the sort of obvious, it wouldn't be as much lean meat as they wanted or as much of all the good foods. So I do think we've got to take that into account, the income side of it, in remote communities in particular.
And but you also got to take into effect what else they spend their money on. A lot of these families are spending money on smokes and alcohol as well. So you take them things out of the equation, the food might not become
I agree with that. There's no question about that. Tobacco is one of the greatest drivers of, it's one of the main consumer items in remote stores. That's true.
And on that point of pricing, I think there's good evidence around alcohol pricing altering consumption patterns, and if we could use a similar model in food, I think either the carrot or the stick. I think there's lots of room to move in changing people's purchasing behaviours through pricing intervention. We've got to look at, as Karen's saying, is it going to work and how effective is it going to be, and what's the cost benefit to the community as a whole for that. And I think when that data comes in, we're going to find that it's very economically sustainable for government to start looking at this. but it needs to be proven well first.
I think Ian's point about there being that a low income is, particularly in an urban context, is not a reason out of eating better is a really strong and important point. You know, there's a lot you can do by knowing, through knowledge is power, just by knowing what things you can substitute affordably. And I think that's what he was.
We've got another poll question for you. What do you think are the modifiable lifestyle risk factors for diabetes? You can tick more than one answer. Is it smoking, poor quality diet, physical inactivity, central obesity, or is it the heavy use of alcohol? Now, what do you think about those modifiable lifestyle risk factors? Is heavy use of alcohol a modifiable lifestyle risk factor for diabetes?
Heavy use of alcohol probably doesn't come out as an independent risk factor, except that it's associated with so many of the others. It's associated with being inactive, with poor quality diet, and being centrally fat. There's no question about that. And alcohol certainly damages the liver, and that's part of being associated with abnormal metabolism leading to diabetes. So they're probably all in there, and many of them are related. Smoking actually stimulates central fat deposition. So alcohol and smoking just do that because they stimulate cortisol, they stimulate the stress axis. So we have all of these things, I think, working together.
And I think that's valid too, in that they all work together and they need to be fixed together. So targeting these things individually might look good on paper, but in reality people's lifestyle needs to be modified as a whole. And like Ian's saying, programs that look at one thing or another thing often miss out on the global picture and aren't as effective.
Now, another question from Barbara, who asked a question earlier. She's a dietitian, actually. She also asks, would it be feasible to ban soft drinks sold by retailers in remote and rural areas?
Great idea.
Well, look, I think it would be terrible to do it without community support. I think it would just cause resentment and anger, very understandably. But there is a community, I don't know if it's still happening, a community in Central Australia that did a very novel thing. They banned, by agreement, the 3 top-selling sugar-sweetened drinks. And that was published, I think, in the Journal of Public Health, this Australian-New Zealand Journal of Public Health recently. And it, over a 12-month period, people actually, I predicted that they would swap to something else, but they didn't. So there was an almost 50% reduction in the sugar consumption from soft drinks, that it was maintained over 12 months. So I think that tells us there are different ways you can do it. And what we know about soft drinks is that that if you do increase the price, people do reduce their consumption. So that there's lots of evidence on that around the world. So I think that's a very good target for price increases rather than banning absolutely at the moment.
And I think this idea of imposing anything upon any population in Australia is outdated, and we've got to look more at Australia as a whole, and targeting Aboriginal people and changing their lives is not on anymore. People have got to take control of their own lives.
It's been tried enough, hasn't it, surely?
We've done that for a long time. It hasn't worked very well.
Yeah, and it's their business, and there are some, further to what Karen said, you know, I know of a number of community-owned, very small stores in WA where the women who run them have banned soft drinks.
Well, here are your responses to our third poll question, which was, what are the modifiable lifestyle risk factors for diabetes? 19% of you said smoking, 35% of you said poor quality diet, 33% of you said physical inactivity, 25% central obesity, and 17% the heavy use of alcohol. Karen, what do you think that says about those modifiable lifestyle risks and what the audience
I think our audience is really very perceptive, because they do all interact. I mean, if you're spending money on smoking, you're not spending on cigarettes, you're not spending money on healthy food. I mean, that's a really important point. And of course it stimulates the stress axis and aggravates central obesity. So does alcohol. And of course, the other three are intimately linked, and there's no question about that.
Another question from our audience. Shafiq asks, good tucker needs good money. How to sort out poverty issue in Indigenous people? I guess this is really the elephant in the room.
Yeah, and that's really what we've been talking about quite a bit. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it, but I agree it's not just a black and white issue.
Another question, Olga Ishenko. She asks, how do you get sufficient supply of fresh fruit and veggies to remote communities at reduced cost? I mean, I guess the costs are, you know, eaten up in freight, and why is it so expensive?
Remoteness is a huge issue, and transport costs and refrigeration costs in areas which are super remote in the middle of nowhere are astronomical. But that's not the only reason why, and I think there's a lot of structures in place which make it difficult for communities to access food, which go beyond pricing and go into the way that stores and shops and corporations manage food supply. And the driver for profitability often pushes up prices for foods which are unhealthy. And I think, from my perspective, a great way to get food into communities cheaply and affordably is to grow it in communities.
Yeah, is to have it locally.
Yeah, is to have it there. And then you don't have to transport it anywhere, you just have to pick it up and eat it.
That's right. I mean, one of the drivers for starting the RIG network was that, you know, just a very simple response to food security and the ridiculous food miles of most food that has gone into remote communities. The cost of fuel is not going to go down unless it gets hugely subsidised. And do we want that? Probably not, from a climate change perspective. So yeah, the food miles that's in food transported into remote communities is huge. The freight costs are enormous. And there's another, further to what Andy said, and that's a core assumption of RIG Network as well. You know, if you grow your own food in a variety of ways, we're not suggesting that, you know, suddenly communities will solve all their food security problems through growing their own food. But growing your own food can augment local food supply, and it can augment your family income, and that's really, really important. And also, food grown locally is probably nutritionally better than food transported in.
I mean, I'd also add to that I think that it won't just be, I would advocate that communities think much more broadly about their own food supply. Coastal communities with fish farming, and then the long history of success in the cattle industry. I mean, I think there are many possibilities that do extend beyond fresh fruit and vegetables that are going to probably make them even more self-sufficient.
I agree with that, and I think, yeah, looking at any individual point, that it's a system of food, and people are getting food from lots of different places at the moment, and you've got to use all those systems to your best advantage.
One more question from our audience, and Deanne Minicon asks, are there good programs or resources targeting pregnant women, babies and young children? We touched on some of those, but can you think of any others, Karen?
No, I think there are. I think every jurisdiction I know of has programs like that. I mean, it's recognised as absolutely fundamental. So I think just go locally to where you are, and you'll find them. You know, all the health departments are supporting them.
And Deanne also asks a question of you, I think, Ian. How successful has Deadly Choices been? And is it being evaluated currently? And evaluation is a thing that's come up again and again.
Yeah, definitely. It's been pretty successful, and it has sort of exploded in a short amount of time throughout our region. We've had some good feedback, we've had some bad feedback. We're always looking to improve, and we are going through the evaluation stages. The program is only just over 12 months old, so there's a lot more that has to be done to it. As I said, it sort of just exploded. We started off as just a simple school-based program, and then Deadly Choices just sort of became the brand and just took off. So we are evaluating it, and we are going to put those evaluation results up once we get them in. But yeah, the program, we didn't expect it to go so well so quick, but it has. So we're now having to adapt to how much it's exploded and how we can now look at getting what we think is a good resource out to different parts of, you know, Queensland, Australia, wherever, because in the end, whether you are rural, remote or urban, the message is still fairly similar. and it's about empowering our people to make the right choices. Gone are the days where, you know, and I think Andy touched on it before, we've got to stop telling people how to do things. If we empower our communities to do stuff, get them to take it on board, you'll get better results that way. And that's all we've done with the Deadly Choices program, and it's had some good results.
This is a really interesting question, and hope we can answer it fairly quickly. Has anyone on the panel experienced a counterproductive shame associated with fruit and vegetable subsidy programs in rural communities? Andy?
No, I haven't.
Well, it would only be if it was forced on a community without their support. That would be the only reason I could imagine it. And I certainly haven't heard of anything like that. It's normally communities are really keen to get something like that.
Right. I agree, and people are normally, with community-run programs, are very excited about it and keen to get on board. Yeah.
Is hepatitis included in Deadly Choices?
When we touch on the different topics such as chronic disease and then to a certain extent substance abuse and that type of stuff, it does get brought up. Because we're still tweaking the program, like we did have sexual health in the program at one stage. We've taken it out at the moment because we're looking at how to better implement it into the program, because it is such a touchy subject, and if you don't deliver it right, it can have some pretty bad results. So we do touch on hepatitis. It does get brought up, to answer the question. In how much detail? You know, depending on the audience and how perceptive they are to it. If they're taking a liking and interest to it, we'll go into more detail for them. And that's how the program's run. It's very adaptable. Whatever the target audience is taking a liking to, and if we need to go into more content, we do so at will. So, yeah, hopefully that answers it.
One last question from the audience. What percentage of food in remote Aboriginal communities can be supplied through local food production? Anthea, what do you reckon? It's a bit of a nebulous question. What do you reckon?
Well, technically, I suppose 100%, because, you know, before white man came to Australia, Aboriginal people supplied their own. They've been the greatest hunters and gardeners in the greater landscape for hundreds of years. But no, I mean, 50 years ago, I think Andy and I were both at a workshop a week or so ago where Leonie Norrington was talking about that, you know, it's not so long ago that 99% or 98% of all communities had robust market gardens, which included, you know, protein sources along with their fishing and other traditional foods. So it's not so long ago that
and it would
was a very substantial portion.
It'd be a very healthy diet, but it would be a very un-Western and atypical diet because it would exclude all of the processed food. I mean, I'd be delighted, but I think it'll be a bit of a hard call, I think.
Yes. But potentially, yeah, definitely.
But grains, that would mean, you know, so I guess that's the thing. I mean, we do say whole grain cereals, that sort of thing. I think realistically we could think about meat, fruit and vegetables. That'd be fantastic. And fish.
Karen O'Day, what's your take-home message? You must have
Well, I guess it's healthy and nutritious foods over the lifespan, and really looking at the very broad base of those, and, you know, going beyond fruit and vegetables, which I think are incredibly important, but they're not the only things. So we do need what we've just been talking about, lean meat and fish, probably also whole grain cereals and related foods like that.
Ian Lacey.
I think understand what a healthy diet is, understand what healthy food is, and be proud of the fact that you actually go out and eat the healthy food. I think the more that you can show in your community that you're doing the right thing and you know what healthy food is and that you're eating healthy food, as I said, people will follow you.
It's the role model model.
It's the role model.
It's a great model.
Anthea, what are your take-home messages?
Support and enable local solutions by local people focusing on food for all sorts of reasons: social, economic, health and environment.
Andy Hume.
I'd say eat your fruit and vegetables, as your mother probably told you. It really does have long-term impacts on your health, and we've now begun to quantify those. So.
Well, I hope you have enjoyed this program on nutrition and its importance for good health. Thank you for watching. The filming of the case studies was done by Media at Work and Spinning Reel Productions. This program is funded by the Department of Health and Ageing with additional support from the St George Foundation and the Marion and E.H. Flack Trust. More information about the issues raised in this program is available on the Rural Health Education Foundation website at rhef.com.au. Go to the Good Tucker program page and click on Resources. If you are a health worker, don't forget to complete and send in your evaluation forms, which can be found on the webpage. You'll receive a certificate of attendance and, if eligible, CPD points. I'm Daniel Browning. Good night.